Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. And this is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., reporting to you. Now, think of it, the destruction of the Republican Party in place as a national political force. Think of the odious Republican Party dwindling back down to what it always should have been. That is to say, a local and state party for bigots, for racists, for warmongers, and primarily focused in the Deep South, in rural America, and in the sparsely populated areas of the Intermountain West. That is what the Republican Party actually deserves to be and represents in terms of interests. Now, of course, when we look at their results, they get much more than that. They get it because of billions upon billions of dollars of support poured in by the Koch brothers and other billionaires and feeders at the public trough, sociopathic elements of all sorts. And when we look at the Republican Party, we've got to say this grouping is a threat to the future of the United States and everybody in it. They block science research. They won't fund the National Institutes of Health. They won't fund the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. They won't fund any of dozens of worthwhile projects. They have now become the party of anti-infrastructure. They hate modern rail. They hate rebuilding the highway system. They hate the ports, docks, canals, and other facilities that we must modernize. Generally speaking, this is the party of the most narrow-minded, crabbed sectors of the population, the 1% or the 1/10 of 1%. These are people who are extremely rich. They have money. They think they will continue to do so. And the Republicans cater to them. And the attitude of those rich parasites is, we don't want to pay for any of that. They refuse to invest in the labor force. They refuse to upgrade the United States so we can have a labor force to compete with and surpass China in the decades ahead. We can do all of that, but we can't do it with this millstone, this albatross around our necks, this ball and chain, the odious, fascistic, reactionary, racist, bigoted, holier-than-thou Republican Party. Well, you know what we've been standing for here at the Tax Wall Street Party. We want the Republican Party destroyed in place, and that means by political means, of course. And I have to say, the great promise of the Trump campaign, which we recognized very early on and have been celebrating ever since, is the idea that Trump could be the wrecking ball. He could bring down the walls of this Babylonian edifice. He could then become, in another sense, the Samson of the Republican Party. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the importance of hair, right? Samson got his strength somehow through his hair. And I guess Trump may be said to have gotten some strength from his hair until Delilah, right? Delilah, in the version of one of these wives that he's had, comes along and snips off his locks and snips off that thing that he's got, the comb over on the top of his head. But in that case, Samson pushes those columns apart, brings down the temple of the Philistines on the heads of all of those tenants. And, of course, the tenants are the Koch brothers, they're Sheldon Adelson, they're all of these horrible people who think that you can buy and sell democracy, national sovereignty, honor, and dignity, the things you can't live without, and which Trump lacks completely. No honor, no dignity, and no Americanism either, because as everybody who looks at this for 2 seconds can see, Trump is the anti-American candidate par excellence, in the sense that he negates all of the important values upon which this is based. And that includes his rejection of higher wages. He said wages are already too high. If you say that, that means you are a low-wage candidate. You're out of the American tradition, which is high wages, high value added, high capital intensity, high energy intensity, high value production that produces profits. Yeah, that produces a social surplus that can then be redeployed in other directions. So all of this, we of the Tax Wall Street Party have been looking at this for a while, and our conclusion is the Republican Party really ought not to exist except as that limited formation that I've said before. And, of course, once you succeed in busting up the Republican Party, the corrupt Democratic Party loses a lot of its cover story, a lot of its ability to hide the dirty parts of its own operations. Those begin to disappear once the Republicans are no longer there as an alibi or as a kind of a boogeyman to frighten people back in to the Democratic Party. And, of course, parenthetically, Bernie Sanders is the border guard of the Republican Party. He's the guy who essentially drives of the Democratic Party, I mean to say. Bernie, if you're trying to leave the Democratic Party for something actually viable, like the Tax Wall Street Party, the Bernie Sanders operation is there. Feel the burn, go back to the Democratic Party, and he's fixing to betray you, as everybody could see in that debate with Hillary Clinton, right? Bernie is an integral part of the Hillary Clinton for president campaign. So that's something like the situation we face. Now, big developments on this front. I guess we're going to go through it a little bit chronologically rather than in medias res. But here's the idea. In the Washington Post of Friday, December 11th, today, front page story, dominant story today in the Insider's Journal here, actually controlled by the Federal Reserve Board. GOP to gird for a floor fight. Possible drama at convention. Excuse me. Scenario seen as more likely as Trump rises. Now, the word here is a smoke-filled room. A smoke-filled room. A cabal. A camarilla. How about that? A little room, a little smoke-filled room. And here we have a bunch of power brokers. Now, in the old days, it used to, whenever you said power brokers, the next words were up against the wall. But in this case, they triumph, but not for long, perhaps. We are at an eatery in Washington, D.C. called The Source, an Asian fusion restaurant near the United States Capitol. And this has long been the locus, the venue for a series of high-profile meetings, but secret, with Reince Priebus, I guess he's a Wisconsin hack politician, perhaps John Birch Society for all we know. He's been meeting with these bigwigs every week for a while because they're supposed to develop ideas for a party that is completely barren of ideas. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. And we're reporting on the looming collapse and destruction of the reactionary party, which has done so much harm to our beloved country under the banner of greed and bigotry and warmongering, union busting, class warfare, war on women, you name it, right? Last week I was telling you about how one of the features of fascism is misogyny. Well, look no further than the Republican Party and their despicable war on women. Worst kind of coward, the ones that on women. Those are the Republicans these days. Make no mistake. So what we're looking at is this fascinating camarilla, or smoke-filled room in the U.S. parlance. And this is here in Washington, D.C., at the stylish eatery known as The Source on Capitol Hill. So it was last Monday evening, a dark and stormy night in the nation's capital. And who do we have? Well, it's Reince Priebus, of the head of the Republican National Committee, party boss Reince, we'll call him. Then we have Ward Baker, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, right? He runs all the Senate campaigns, or if they want the money, he does. Rob Sims, the head of the National Republican Congressional Committee, that's for the House of Representatives. Ron Kaufman, a Republican National Committee member, a National Committee man, representing Romney. Isn't that interesting? Representing Romney. Pollster Linda DeVal. Then we have an advisor to Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. This guy's known as Whit Ayers. His relation to Bill Ayers is still being investigated. Vin Weber. This is a congressman who quit years ago now. He's generally a lobbyist, and he's usually on the side of the austerity ghouls. So make no mistake about that. But Vin Weber appears here as a representative of the campaign of Jeb Bush, Jebby. Now, you'll notice here, this is not fair. This is kind of an ex parte proceeding, which you're not supposed to do. What can we say if they invite representatives of Rubio campaign, representatives of the Jeb Bush campaign, and even representatives of Romney, who's theoretically not even running, although he might be brought in as a solution if you have a hung convention. And they're all there confabulating. So the idea is that at a certain point, Reince Priebus says, well, we've got to examine the rules of the Republican Party and see what can be done about Trump. And when they say Trump, they also mean, at least some of them mean Cruz, not all, and rather more of them also mean Carson. So we'll get to that in just a minute. So the idea was a brokered convention. Now, we'll get to this terminology. These terms have not been used for such a long time that most of these stupid scribblers and prostitutes, they don't know what these different terms mean because they've never been used in the lifetimes of many of these sort of overgrown adolescents who do a lot of the writing. So what they're talking about is, in the old days, this whole thing would have been known as a Stop Trump movement. Stop Trump. That is very much the idea. But they don't call it, they call it a brokered convention, which I guess is one way to describe it. So they're trying to think of ways to unite all the anti-Trump forces. And of course, the anti-Trump forces outnumber the Trump forces by about 2-1, right? It's about, 1/3 for Trump at most. And then 2/3 are not for Trump. So that leaves Trump with 1/3 of 1/3, but it's really more like 1/3 of 1/4. So between a 9th and a 12th of the U.S. electorate, which is not very impressive, although it has been hyped. So what they want to do is promote the idea of converging on a kind of a united front, or sacred union, right? Union sacrée. They want to have a convergence on one establishment figure that they can support. And they're also telling the people who are running, when you or if and when you have to drop out, don't completely end your campaign, but suspend it. And what does that mean, suspend it? It means if you suspend it, you can keep your delegates together once the delegates start getting assigned, and then they won't drift off to Trump or somebody like that or get bribed, right? They're going to be pledged to you. As far as I know, it is still the case that the delegates assigned as a result of presidential primary elections and caucuses also, they are bound to vote according to the way they were chosen on the first ballot, but only on the first ballot. And after that, they can vote for whomever they wish. In other words, they will be up for grabs. They will be up for bribery and threats and all the other charming ways that Republicans work out these things. Now, there has not been a convention that went past the first ballot in many moons. We'll try to work out exactly how long it's been since there was a convention that went to the second ballot. It's not even clear. It goes way back. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the main thing is the political impact just of the announcement that this is going on. This is huge. It shows how weak the Republican Party is, that its unity, right, its coherence is extremely fragile, and that people are in the Republican Party who really have no use for the Republican Party. Carson, Trump, they're not Republicans really. They don't care about this, and well, they might not, but you get the idea. There are other people who want to have the Republican Party go on and on, like Jeb Bush, because he says that's my family business. That's my CIA Bush faction in the Republican Party. Now, Trump had already been asked last week, what about a contested convention? Trump says, I don't think it's going to be a brokered convention. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Let's talk more about this great possibility which is opened up, right? We've got a clear path to the destruction of the Republicans. Trump says he does not think it will be a brokered convention. He was asked contested, but he says he would attempt to win that, but he would have a certain disadvantage because in a contested convention, it would be Trump against essentially the traditional Republicans of all stripes, guys who grew up with each other, who know each other intimately, and he doesn't know who they are. That's a big disadvantage. These kind of guys, stay close. They all know each other. They want each other to win. So you get the idea. Now, Trump, yesterday meaning, I guess Thursday the 10th, and indeed, on the 9th of December too, more or less the stuff was boiling up. Trump, says, he might have to bolt the Republican Party. He might have to quit. He might have to start a third party if he's not treated fairly. In other words, he says he's the front runner and he should enjoy the rights, privileges, and prerogatives that accrue to a front runner. And he says, I'm front runner by a mile. Fine. They're not going to do that, I guess, Donald. So what are you going to do about that yourself? You can see how this dynamic gets going. Now, Trump says he's got at this point, he's got about 30% of the Republican Party, which means he's got 70% of the Republican Party against him. But the media, you wouldn't know that by watching television, would you? Trump always crows that he's ahead and so forth. He also says that there's a new poll which says that 68% of his supporters, Trump people, would bolt the party with him and help to form a third party. with this, you can already see how the Republican Party could be permanently destroyed as a national party, because the Republicans, as we've seen, they have a very, very hard time getting a majority of the Electoral College, to say nothing of the popular vote, in all these elections since 2000 and years before that even, right? The whole Clinton time, and so forth, right? 92, 96, all bad news. 2000, they won the popular vote. There were even questions in 2004 and then the Obama years. So the Republicans are hurting at that level. If you minus even 5% out of that, they are in basically hopeless condition. But of course, the problem with Trump is, if you look at it the other way around, Trump has got 30% of 25%, and then he's going to have 68% of that come with him. So he's down to 6, 7, 8%. So I think he is, of course, a megalomaniac. And these arguments might say, well, once I get out of the Republican Party, my independent stance and my ability to fight and go all the way will electrify the universe and capture the attention of everybody. So he may think that he can do it. If he does, it will be one of those examples, which we always note, when evil does good in spite of itself. When evil fights evil, attacks evil, destroys evil, this is how good has traditionally benefited. It's actually one of the main reasons we're here, one of the reasons that civilization has survived. So, anyway, we've got a nice, clean threat by Trump to pick up his dollies and go home, and he would do that even with this wretched, bedraggled contingent of, 7, 8, 9%, on the best scenario for Trump. But now we have a Daniel come to judgment. We have got a statesman. We have a person of long-term strategic vision, a friend of the people. And I'm referring to Dr. Ben Carson, because Dr. Ben Carson he's been catapulted into interplanetary space by this camarilla, right? This meeting of the people from Romney, the people from Jeb, the people from Rubio, right? The establishment guys. Ben Carson is in high dudgeon. He's not going to allow the American people to be trampled upon. And I'm probably going to have to read most of this because it's so perfect. He's got lines in here that sound like they were lifted from things that I've written over the past, couple of weeks or months and years. Dr. Ben Carson released a statement on Party Boss insider meeting reported in the Washington Post. Yesterday, I was the only one saying Party Boss, right, on the model of Soviet Party Boss Khrushchev, and that would be Reince Priebus of Wisconsin. So, Alexandria, Virginia, December 11th. Today, Dr. Ben Carson, retired neurosurgeon and 2016 GOP presidential candidate, released the following statement. This all in quotes now. If the leaders of the Republican Party want to destroy the party, I repeat, if the leaders of the Republican Party want to destroy the party, they should continue to hold meetings like the one described in the Washington Post of this morning. This is the article that I've just read to you from, right, from today's WAPO. If this was the beginning of a plan to subvert the will of the voters and replace it with the will of the political elite, I assure you that Donald Trump will not be the only one leaving the party. I pray that the report in the Post this morning was incorrect. If it is correct, every voter who is standing for change must know they are being betrayed, and I will not stand for that. This process is the one played out by our party. If the powerful try to manipulate it, the Republican National Convention in Cleveland next summer may be the last convention. I couldn't have said this better myself. I am prepared to lose fair and square. as you will, as I am sure Donald is. He's not, actually. But I will not sit by and watch a theft. I intend on being the nominee. If I am not, the winner will have my support. If the winner isn't our nominee, then we have a massive problem. My campaign is about we the people and not they the powerful. Again, the far-seeing and enlightened statesmanship of Carson is exciting. Voters, Americans everywhere are focused now on this absolutely great statement. If they want to destroy the party, and this will be our last convention. So this is the Carson statement. So now you can see perhaps that my talk over recent years about the possible destruction of the Republican Party, this is absolutely realistic. And you can see if they do try to exclude Trump in some way, treat him unfairly, sandbag him, whatever it is, exclude him, disadvantage him, he will go ballistic and he will walk out. If he runs and brings down the Republican Party, I guess in terms of his megalomania, that would perhaps prove satisfying. I think Carson has a Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C., and bringing you the good news of the looming collapse and destruction of the reactionary Republican political entity. And this is going to be a sight for sore eyes. You got to thank God that you got to see this. I hope it goes all the way in the next year or so, or maybe quicker. Remember, Trump is theoretically getting, something like 25% of the Republican votes, maybe a little bit more in some of these early primary states. Carson, a month ago, was the front runner himself. So we got the two people who have alternated, at least to some extent, at the top of the Republican field. We've got Carson, who was leading at least for a while, and then we've got Trump, who has been leading for much of the time since about May, June of earlier this year. So he says, if the leaders of the Republican Party want to destroy the party, keep doing what you're doing, and maybe this will be our last convention. And he also says that Donald Trump will not be the only one leaving the party. Well, between them, this is at least half of the Republican primary voter base. It may be more. It may be 55 or 60%, right? The two of them were close. They were somewhere between 25 and 30. You can check it on Real Clear Politics or someplace like this. So don't take it just from me. My diagnosis of the state of the Republican Party was realistic, and we've now got no one less than Ben Carson here to tell us the story. Now let's talk a couple of other aspects about this. For Trump, of course, it's the illusion of fairness that counts, right? It's a matter of prestige. We have to focus in now on a couple of these other Republicans. When Trump went into this raving, hysterical, xenophobic, anti-American rant, is if you're anti-immigrant, you're anti-American, huh? There's no way out of that one. Look at the history. If you're low wage, you're anti-American. Same story. Confederate states might get by. America, no. So, Paul Ryan, otherwise known as Blackbeard, or maybe Bluebeard, Blaubart Schloss is supposed to be his favorite listening, right? Bluebeard's Castle. Blackbeard, Bluebeard, Paul Ryan, he's actually I think he's inspired by the Russian anarchists of the 19th century, or maybe some of the Italian anarchists. These were all bearded. And the idea is the Republican House grouping is essentially a bunch of anarchists. So maybe he's going to show us that. What did Paul Ryan did? He said, what was said yesterday? Now, the clips I heard on television, he didn't say Trump. He just said, what was said yesterday is un-American, un-Republican, not conservative, whatever. But the question with these people is, they are such hypocrites. They are such double talkers. They're supposed to say, I will never support such a person as the nominee of my party to be the president of the United States, right? Tom Ridge did that. Tom Ridge, former governor of Pennsylvania, former member of the Bush machine, certainly, Bush cabinet. And, of course, he was the head of Homeland Security. He was the founding secretary of the Department of Homeland Security when it was created out of thin air. One thinks for him, he had been defeated back in the 90s I think he wanted to be a senator. That didn't work for him. But he was the governor of Pennsylvania for quite a while. So he came on television, and they asked him, will you support Trump if he's the nominee? And the answer was, not a chance, not a chance. Well, that's not the clear language from Bluebeard or Blackbeard Ryan. He's hemming and hawing. He said, well, I'm the Speaker of the House, and therefore I'm the chairman of the Republican National Convention, so I can't. I have to be open-minded and impartial. Yeah, with a Nazi. Thank you. That's a great anti-fascist stance by Bluebeard Ryan. And who's going to be surprised? The guy is from the despicable John Birch Society, who are beneath contempt. We've heard from Carson. But now we have to look at Ted Cruz. This is in some ways the most interesting. This unctuous hypocrite leaves a trail of grease as he moves across the floor. He's like a snail advancing on a pseudopod, and it leaves a trail of grease. Think of him like that. The sallow face, unctuous hypocrite, Ted Cruz. Now, his hypocrisy makes him somewhat more effective than Trump in some ways. He may be more durable because he panders to different groups in a more effective way. Now, notice, in public, he always says, oh, they always want me to attack my friend Donald Trump. I won't do that because, of course, he's hoping to get the legions of dupes and the legions of rage that Trump has gathered around himself. But then, as the New York Times has proven with a tape, Cruz says in private, he says, well, a president must have good judgment. How about Trump? The obvious. So he attacks Trump in private. And he's going to have to do that because if he goes into February, if Trump is still in the field, as there's every reason to think he will be, then Cruz is probably going to have to start getting rough with Trump, and those supporters are going to have to choose which way they go. A lot of this will depend on how much of a ground operation Trump has. Cruz has kind of a ground operation in Iowa and elsewhere. Not so clear what Trump has going. I'm sure he's got something, but not maybe that effective. So that's essentially at the end of January, beginning of February, we're going to have the Iowa caucuses. When you look at Cruz, I'm thinking of Robert Lowell's famous line in that poem about the Union dead in the heart of Boston back in the 1950s. A savage servility slides by on grease. That's Ted Cruz. Stab you in the back, hypocrite, sallow-faced, and that pained, concerned look on his face, right? He's so concerned about the predicament of our country. Now, the other side of this is the U.S. Well, no, actually, let's go through some things. You have a brokered convention. A brokered convention is when the whole thing is decided top down, and the floor action is of relatively little importance. Now, one of these was the group of Republican senators, right? The powerful Republican senators in 1920 in Chicago put together the classic smoke-filled room. So this was all of these senators, and every senator represented one of the trusts, right? One of the monopolies, one of the cartels. This was room 404 of the Blackstone. I think it became the Sheraton Blackstone. But the Blackstone Hotel in Chicago, 1920, a group of senators and power brokers were in a room. It's a small room. It was so full of cigar smoke that you couldn't see from one end of the room to the other. So you'd hear voices speaking out of the way. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. This is our second hour on World Crisis Radio. Why don't you go to TWSP.US, TaxWallStreetParty.us, signified as TWSP.US, and subscribe to the daily briefing of the Tax Wall Street Party. You can also do this through Tarpley.net, and Tarpley.net gets you the full array of all my work, my Twitter, my work in the audio visual realm, and also my books are there, right? Christmas is coming. Think of how much you'd like to challenge the essentially ignorant prejudices, the ignorant Philistine banal prejudices of some relative, and enlighten them with a copy of one of my books. But now we're going to go into our foreign news in just a minute, but this change in the U.S. climate that allows us to see, at least, right, the outlines in the mist of how the Republican Party might be destroyed. That is some of the best Advent holiday news that anyone could think of, right? It's going to be, St. Lucy's in a couple of days, the Festival of Lights, and therefore we're looking, we're trying to get enough light so we can see how the Republicans will go down. So here's the idea. The brokered convention is typically the smoke-filled room. Room 404, Blackstone Hotel, right? Chicago, 1920. Warren Gamaliel Harding, a little-known contender, chosen by these Wall Street controlled senators, hacks and thugs, and he becomes the nominee. Now, there's also something called an open convention. This is actually a demand. I've worked on this at different times. Say, 1976, there was a demand, and 1980 also, perhaps 1980 is a better example. In 1980, it was would have been important for Ted Kennedy's forces to get some exposure on the debate, right? That they control some of the time, but Jimmy Carter, with his machine of thugs, was able to shut that down. So 1980 in particular, not an open convention for the Democrats. The other way you can look at this is a contested convention. A contested convention is what might happen if there is no top-down control. Well, let's just go through the contested. The most contested of all was the 1860, right before the Civil War. In 1860, the Democratic National Convention met in Charleston, South Carolina. They balloted for 10 days and could not agree on a candidate because the Democrats, for the second half of the 19th century up till 1936, the Democrats had a 2/3 majority requirement. So this sometimes led to their, lots and lots of ballots. But in the April 1860, Democratic National Convention met in South Carolina, could not agree, and then reconvened in Baltimore, Maryland 2 months later, but also could not do anything, could not agree on a candidate, and then split. So we have two wings of the Democratic Party. The northern delegates nominated Stephen Douglas of Illinois and the doctrine of popular sovereignty, squatter sovereignty, which was bad. And the other one was the Proto-Confederates. They nominated John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, which called for the defense, the extreme ideological defense of slavery in all of the territories, not just south of the Missouri Compromise line, but all of them. And then, so that meant that party had split. That was the most, unbrokered, the most contested that we've seen. And then, of course, in May, the Republicans were supposed to nominate Seward, but to get the West, they nominated Lincoln. So those are the variations. Brokered convention, smoke-filled room. Open convention, worthwhile but hard to get under certain circumstances. Contested convention, if there's no group at the top that's running things. And indeed, we may be close to a contested Republican convention, because maybe this group at the top who kid themselves that they're the power brokers, they represent precious little except a lot of money, media contacts, insider stuff, right? But in terms of the raw power of the streets, they don't have that. I think what we have here, as I suggested before, is a Stop Trump movement. The 1976 one was between Gerald Ford and Reagan, and Ford came in there just a few dozen votes short of what he needed, and eventually went over the top with the help of all kinds of nefarious tricks. So you get the idea. There are all these variations. And a lot of them have not been seen for a long time, because usually, as you know, it's a very banal, very stupid photo op, not entertaining, low ratings, not interesting, because they don't talk any substance. They just want to tell you how great they are. Remember when Kerry got to the Democratic convention, I think in Boston in 2004, and he saluted and said he was reporting for duty. This was the attempt of the Democrats to wrap themselves in the flag of warmongering and so forth. So anyway, Stop Trump movement is there, but a Stop Trump movement supported by Reince Priebus and the large powers of the Republican National Committee, that's going to be seen as unfair treatment by the Donald, so he may be out of there. We've also got, however, to think about this. The impact of Trumpism, in other words, the seeming short-term success of demagogy and racism and bigotry and fascism, Nazism, these aspects of Trump have undoubtedly excited the imagination of some of these fascistoid members of the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives. How extreme will they be right now? And it's going to be specific. Apparently they're rather extreme. The goal had been to pass the necessary spending bills by midnight tonight as I speak to you. In other words, it's the afternoon of Friday, the 11th of December, 2015. Within 6 or 8 hours, those appropriations bills, those spending bills, were supposed to have been passed, yet they have not been passed. There is chaos. So yesterday, the Senate approved a 5-day continuing resolution to keep spending at what are now the levels of the 2015 budget. passed, more than a year ago. And the House, I think, is going to be in the process of passing that too. God knows you can't take anything for granted. So the idea is that will be 5 days. That will get us to next Tuesday, Wednesday, something like this. So that is the framework. But now, will the freedom fighters up in the air? Nothing's been to the abyss. Republican Party. Okay? Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we want to get a good orientation on the situation in Syria and the rest of the Middle East. Let's just note many things that you haven't been told by the corrupt U.S. media. The city of Homs, which was considered the cradle of the rebellion, has been liberated by the Syrian army, working together with Hezbollah, the Russian Air Force, perhaps some Iranians also. City of Ramadi, the great conquest of ISIS, Daesh, earlier this year, cut off, encircled, under siege, and might have to surrender fairly soon. And progress of the Syrian Arab army towards Aleppo, also in terms of seizing this key highway that goes down then to Damascus. But let's get our expert to make sense of all of this, and that is Thierry Maison speaking to us from Damascus. So Thierry, lots of things changing militarily, and I know you want to look at it from the point of view of Turkey, Qatar, and Russia. So please do go ahead.
Yes, first, the Turkish government is always preparing the third Syrian war to create a new Kurdistan, but Kurdistan without Kurds, in the north of Syria with the help of the Peshmerga, I mean the army of the Iraqi Kurds. And to do that, the government of Turkey deployed 1,000 of soldiers in Iraq to train the Peshmerga, the Iraqi Kurds, and they give them a lot of tanks and a lot of weapons. Of course, this was discovered by the Iraqi government, who asked to the Turkish to withdraw from their territory, and Ahmed Davutoglu, which is now the Prime Minister of Turkey, answer with a lot of arrogance, saying that they enter in Iraq with the authorization of the government of Baghdad, and they don't want to go out because they are helping their friends from the Kurdish government inside in the district of Iraq. And
outrageous.
Baghdad decide to inform the Security Council of the United Nations, and we will see what will happen now. At the same time, the Qatar government tried to organize a false flag operation to accuse Russia to destroy some equipment from the Syrian army. So that's why the Defense Ministry of Qatar buy some Russian bombs in Ukraine. They did this 2 months ago, but they need time to transfer these weapons in Syria. They use planes from the coalition, probably Qatari planes, but it's not sure. But some planes from the coalition, and they bomb a Syrian army building in near Deir ez-Zor at the north of Syria. They kill 3 Syrian soldiers, and they Wounded 24. And of course, they use this Russian bombs, so they can say that they are not implied. They said it was an error from the Russian army and not an attack from the coalition. Unfortunately for them, the Russian government discovered that the traffic between Ukraine and Qatar, and they published some documents to testify this traffic, and so the Qatar false flag operation was discovered.
Right.
But yes, sorry.
No. That's the whole operation is now exposed as a fraud in the eyes of the world, and very embarrassing.
Yes. yes, but it's very embarrassing, but nobody is embarrassed, in fact, because Qatar is always supported by the United States, so that's a very strange situation. Everybody knows that Qatar organized this false flag operation, but there is no reaction at all at the United Nations right now. So, but what is important now is that the Russian army is preparing a very big operation inside Syria. They need some time to do that, but first they open a second military base in Syria, and they are trying to create a third one in the east of Syria, just at the border with Turkey and Iraq. And if they are able to create this third military base, it will be easy for the Russians to stop the project of Turkey, France, United Kingdom, Israel, and Saudi Arabia to create this new state in the north of Syria. And right now, we don't see any change in on the military level inside Syria, but this is absolutely normal because the Russians are continuing their bombing to destroy the main equipments from Daesh, from the ISIL, and from other terrorist groups, of course. And at the same time, the Arab Syrian army and Hezbollah are preparing an uprising of the people who are under the rule of the terrorists. So we can already anticipate that in 1 or 2 months, you will have a big change in Syria with the uprising of the population against the terrorists, and suddenly they will be ousted from the main part of Syria, except for the desert. Of course, they will already use the desert for them.
Hang on 1 second, Thierry. We've got to have a break, but I'll just get you back for a couple of minutes and see if we can clarify that big news we just talked about. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. And we're on the line with Thierry Maison from Damascus, Syria, the only Western correspondent continuously in the Syrian capital since all this started back in, one particular, he's been there since October, November of 2011. Now, Thierry, that is big news. So there is an uprising, a rebellion, right? A rebellion prepared by Hezbollah and other forces against the oppression, the misrule, the terrible conditions that have been imposed by ISIS, Daesh, but also against some of these others, the Nusra, Al-Qaeda, perhaps. Is that right?
Yes, right. And we don't know exactly how the Russians will proceed to help for this rebellion, but it's clear that the Russians are now testing new weapons all over Syria. You remember I explained in a previous broadcast that the Russian militaries create a new weapon to imitate the communication and the commands of NATO. So, in a circle 300 kilometers around Latakia,
Right.
NATO is no more able to command its own weapons. They are no more able to use missiles, for example. But in the last weeks, Russia tested this weapon and something else in the Mediterranean side of Syria. So for 2 days, Lebanon was forced to close its airport in Beirut because it was no more possible for them to control the civilian planes, and it was the same in Cyprus, in front in the Mediterranean Sea.
Right.
And 2 days ago, they closed also, during 2 days, the airport of Erbil in Iraq, exactly for the same reason. Officially, the Russians said we are testing new missiles in these parts of the ground, but in fact, it's clear that they are testing missiles and other weapons at the same time. And it's clear that if they test this, it's to show to the Lebanese, to the Cyprus, and to the Iraqi government that they are now controlling everything with new weapons, and that NATO can't interfere with the Russian army. So
Now,
what is changing?
Gary, when you say Cyprus, does the Cyprus also include those British Royal Air Force bases on Cyprus?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. As you know, there is two Russian, British Air Forces bases in Cyprus, and both of them were blocked during 2 days. Yes. So at the same time, we can see that Saudi Arabia tried to organize a new political opposition. They invite some groups in Riyadh to create a political platform against the Syrian government. But in fact, this meeting was not conclusive because there is always big opposition in different groups, and they don't invite the Kurdish people from Syria. So it's clear that Saudi Arabia is not is not part of the French, British, and Israeli plan to create this new Kurdistan in the north of Syria. So as the troops of the jihadists are divided in these two different blocks, certainly they will lose more quickly.
So you were saying you've called this, I think, the Pseudo-Kurdestan, right? And if I could ask, you say the people supporting this are Turkey, France, Israel, and some others you mentioned?
And the British, yes. You know, it's exactly the same situation that in 1956 with the Suez Canal. If you remember at that time, you had France, United Kingdom, and Israel attacking the Suez Canal and Egypt, and they were supported by Turkey. It's exactly the same. So I think that probably you will have the same reaction, both from Russia and from the United States, and they will stop this colonial powers.
Well, that would be very happy for the end of the year. Let's just see.
It must be at the beginning of next year, not at the end. They need 1 month or two to begin the operation here.
Thierry, a lot of people here are interested in your report about the Saudi AWACS aircraft used to shoot down the Russian Sukhoi some weeks ago.
Yes. For this operation against the Russian plane, it's now sure that the Turkish use an AWACS from Saudi Arabia because of the Russian weapons. It was not possible for the Turkish Air Force to guide the missile on the Russian plane. So they need an AWACS for that, and it was one from Saudi Arabia. But at the same time, you have another AWACS in the sky, who's from NATO, comes from Greece, and it is unclear if the Turkish Air Force use only the Saudi AWACS or also the NATO AWACS. But all the documents we have, including the radars, shows that the operation was prepared long time before. And this is, of course, this corresponds with the alert that Fuad Avni, a famous whistleblower from Turkey, announced 1 month before this attack. He announced that the Turkish government will destroy a Russian plane to oust Russia from the north of Syria. But as you see, the result is absolutely contrary of that. And right now, Russia is extending its presence in the north of Syria.
All right. We're just about out of time. Is there anything to add?
No, nothing, except that it's very difficult right now to understand who is governing in the United States, because, yes, really. We have two different powers at the same time, and it's difficult to know who is deciding for the military.
We'll try to clarify it as best we can. But we got rid of Allen. It's time for Ashton Carter to be fired. See you soon, Thierry. Thank you. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. One more segment. A little bit under the weather here. Begging for everyone's kind indulgence. But that's something interesting, huh? A mass uprising, a Vespri Siciliani, a mass uprising against the foreign yoke, because those jihadis are foreigners. They're Uyghurs, Chechens, Saudis, Libyans. They're not Syrians. And remember, the Syrians, I'd say along with the Iraqis, but the Syrians perhaps more than anybody, that's your highly educated, tolerant, and socially advanced group in the Arab world, much more so than, say, the backward people there in Saudi Arabia. Now, Egypt, of course, is also in the highly developed group, and the idea that we're seeing a re-edition of the Suez debacle of 1956. We'll talk about that next time. Remember what that was? The British and the French did a sneak attack with landings at Alexandria, Port Said. The Israelis attacked through the Sinai, and what stopped it was the Eisenhower administration. George Humphrey, the Secretary of the Treasury, say, you want to do that, you pay, we're cutting financial support to you. Down they went, and down went Sir Anthony Eden. So maybe Cameron and the British and the Hollande, maybe they'll go down too as a result of this Turkish, French, Israeli and British attempt to set up a pseudo-Kurdestan. In other words, a fake non-Kurdistan. Okay, a couple of other things to finish up now on the issues of the next week is the Republican debate. Oh, my heavens. It's going to be on Tuesday evening on CNN, and the Tax Wall Street Party will live tweet the GOP debate next Tuesday. So tune in. As we mentioned before, the Senate has passed a 5-day continuing resolution. House expected to do the same thing. One interesting thing that came out is, how do you tie up and practically cripple the great United States of America with 40 to 50 fascistic, hysterical, irrational, subjectivist members of Congress? Well, you've got to have your 40 or 50. That's the Tea Party. And then you have the Hope Yes, Vote No conference, or caucus, 120 of these reactionary Republicans. The first were fascists. These are now reactionaries. And they say, well, we vote against everything. We hope it passes for the good of the country, but we're not going to stick our necks out. So that's that. And then only 80 are loyal to Bluebeard Ryan. 80. So that's what the Republican Party has come down to, a speaker who's got just 80 supporters. All this written up in the daily briefings of the week. Now, last week I talked about Pearl Harbor. Whenever we do this, we always get the Kimmel and Short brigade of followers coming forward to defend their people. And we have the Stinnett lovers. We have the Roosevelt haters, the New Deal haters coming forward. The whole Chicago Tribune, Regnery, all those people, they have to say, oh, the evil Roosevelt provoked the wonderful peace-loving Japanese. And this includes, by the way, the Paul Tard faction, because Ron Paul has embraced this entire stuff. The Roosevelt haters have not developed a single idea since December 7th, 1941. And indeed, one of the America First sort of pro-Nazi types was giving a speech at the day of Pearl Harbor and was trashing Roosevelt. And then the news came in of the Japanese attack, and this character from the America First had to reorient his speech in the course of the event and essentially start saying the things that these people have been repeating ever since. So here's a very low level, but I think absolutely convincing area of analysis, right? Let's go from Kimmel and Short then to Petraeus and Allen, now by way of people like Westmoreland and so forth. Look, the order given to Kimmel and Short was, you should conduct appropriate reconnaissance. Now, Short and Kimmel especially were adamant, saying, if you don't do everything, you must do nothing. And they were supported in one of the Navy boards of inquiry by none other than Bull Halsey, who is one of the most overrated people. You look at his, really not very clever behavior at the Battle of Leyte Gulf and so forth. But they trotted out old Bull Halsey to say, yeah, Kimmel was right, because the Navy wanted to protect itself from negative publicity. Now, here's what Kimmel and Short had to mount a significant search, reconnaissance, to see if the Japanese fleet was coming. Since 1928, and a drill was done in 1928, they have been drilling. The main danger to Pearl Harbor is a Japanese aircraft carrier mounted attack coming from the north to northwest, practically. So what were you throwing out there, right? If you just sit there and wait, you're going to get clobbered. You've got to have ways to get your Army aviation, the so-called Pineapple Air Force. You got to get that. The Hawaiian Air Force, got to get that in the air. Got to have the Navy aircraft ready to go. You got to have your reconnaissance planes out, and you got to have a screen of warships out there. So what could they do? Let's just take a look. On Pearl Harbor Day, the important ships that I would focus on would be 8 light cruisers that Kimmel had, and those had float planes on the back. I think most of them 1, but maybe some more modern 2 float plane versions. 8 light cruisers. Now, every one of those can go out there and can cover 250 miles on either side, all right? So that would give you a lot. You send some of those out to 200 miles, 300 miles, make sure that they have the planes up at dawn every morning. You've got 50 destroyers. Now, could not 10 or 15 of those been sent north to try to scout the Japanese fleet? You had 33 submarines. Those could also have been used for exactly the same scouting purpose. And 100 patrol bombers. Now, this would have included the PBY Catalina, lumbering but very long range. You had the B-18 Bolo bomber, 500 miles out. And yes, you had some B-17s. Not a lot, maybe 10. But those could have been sent out, and they could get out to about 750 miles. So there was all that could have been done. And they did none of it. Zero, nothing. Instead, Kimmel went to a luau that night before. So the other thing is the top brass in the Navy Department said, you should develop some sampans. Now, sampans, maybe we'd call them trawlers. Maybe we'd call them, irregular ships. You have the Dunkirk experience. You can do a lot with small ships under certain circumstances. Dunkirk in June of 1940. And then we also have the fact that when the U.S. mounted the Doolittle raid towards Japan in the spring of 1942, just a couple of months after this, it was a Japanese fishing trawler that discovered the attackers and got off a warning. Now, the problem was that the people in Tokyo didn't realize that this was going to be an attack using light to medium bombers flown off the deck of an aircraft carrier, because that had never happened. See, the idea is when you surprise an oligarch, that's what you get. So, to sum it up briefly, Kimmel and Short struck out totally because they didn't do any of this, to say nothing of the radar, which they neglected. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.